Join me as I explore this haunted hospital and try to uncover its darkest secrets from the past. This notorious hospital has a dark past that's been shrouded in mystery for decades. Rumors of paranormal activity, unexplained events, and tragic stories have all contributed to its eerie reputation. Today, I'm going to uncover some of the secrets that have haunted this place for so long. Many reasons why this hospital is considered one of the most haunted places on Earth. From the strange noises and apparitions to the gruesome stories of patient mistreatment, it's no wonder people are drawn to its dark history. Locals have avoided this place for years, whispering tales of curses and supernatural occurrences that'll send chills down your spine. Historians have tried to unravel the mysteries behind its haunted reputation, but the more they dig, the more questions they're left with. One of the most bizarre aspects of this hospital's history is the sheer number of reported paranormal sightings, from ghostly apparitions in the corridors to disembodied voices in the operating rooms. It seems like the hospital is a hotbed of supernatural activity, and yet, despite the overwhelming evidence, no one can quite pinpoint the source of this activity. Is it the restless spirits of former patients or something more sinister at play? The hospital's dark reputation has been fueling rumors and speculation for years. Locals claim to have seen shadowy figures lurking in the abandoned wards, while others have reported hearing strange noises and whispers in the empty corridors. But what's really behind these strange occurrences? Is it simply the product of overactive imaginations, or is there something more substantial at play? As we delve deeper into the history of the hospital, it becomes clear that this place has seen its fair share of tragedy and heartbreak. From botched operations to abandoned patients, the stories that have emerged from these walls are nothing short of chilling. It's no wonder the hospital has become a hotbed of paranormal activity. The energy of all those tragic events has created a perfect storm of supernatural occurrences. The hospital was founded in the early 1900s, with the goal of providing medical care to the local community. But from the very beginning, things took a dark turn. Patient mistreatment, medical malpractice, and even reports of demonic possession all mar the hospital's history. It's no wonder the place has become a magnet for ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts. As the hospital grew and expanded, so did its dark reputation. Reports of ghostly apparitions and unexplained occurrences became more frequent, until eventually the hospital was forced to close its doors due to the sheer volume of paranormal activity. But even today, people claim to have seen strange lights and heard disembodied voices emanating from the abandoned building. But one of the most shocking secrets surrounding this hospital has remained hidden until now. It's a story that'll make your blood run cold. It's something that'll change the way you think about this place forever. You see, it's been discovered that the hospital's founder had a dark secret, one that would have devastating consequences for the patients entrusted to his care. It turns out that the founder was a member of a secret society, one that was obsessed with the occult and supernatural rituals. This shocking revelation raises more questions than answers. Was the hospital's dark reputation a result of these occult rituals? Or was it simply a byproduct of the founder's twisted ideology? Whatever the reason, one thing is certain. This hospital is a hotbed of supernatural activity. It's about to get a whole lot spookier. The dark past of this hospital is a sobering reminder of the devastating consequences of playing with forces beyond our control. It's a warning about the dangers of delving into the unknown and the importance of respecting the boundaries between the natural and supernatural worlds. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the heart of this haunted hospital. If you've got any thoughts or theories about the secrets we've uncovered, be sure to leave them in the comments below. And if you're interested in exploring more haunted places, be sure to check out our next video, where we'll be delving into the dark history of an abandoned asylum.
Part 1: The Abandoned Hospital. The hospital stood like a broken monolith, looming over the desolate landscape. Vines twisted around rusted steel beams, crawling up its cracked stone facade like tendrils of decay. No one had entered it in years, at least, not without regretting it. Local legends spoke of its past with a kind of reverence, the way one might speak of a tomb filled with cursed gold. The stories whispered through town were enough to keep anyone from venturing too close. Anyone except us. I wasn't always drawn to places like this, but something about that hospital gripped me the moment I laid eyes on it. Maybe it was its sheer defiance, standing tall against the pull of time, or maybe it was the feeling that this place wanted me, called to me. I wasn't the first to feel this way. Many had come before, and few had left unscathed. Some, in fact, had never left at all. That's why we decided to go in. We were looking for something, though we weren't entirely sure what. The plan was simple: explore, document, and uncover the truths long buried beneath the dust and crumbling walls. But as the night closed in, and the sky bled from violet to black, our excitement was replaced with a creeping dread that none of us dared to voice. The entrance was sealed, but in the way that only seemed to encourage more foolhardy attempts to get in. We pried the boards loose from a side window, stepping into what had once been the waiting room. The air was thick, stagnant, like no one had breathed it in years. Dust swirled around our feet, disturbed by our movement. We hadn't even been inside for 5 minutes, and I already felt it, the unease that clung to the walls like a sickness. Anyone else feel that? Erin, the skeptic of the group, whispered. Her voice echoed softly down the dark corridor ahead. Feel what? Jacob asked, swinging his flashlight in wide arcs. The beam flickered, casting jagged shadows along the walls. Like, we're not supposed to be here. We all laughed nervously, dismissing her. We weren't supposed to be here, after all. The hospital had been condemned decades ago, but none of us expected that the walls themselves would feel hostile. The further we ventured in, the worse it became. The temperature dropped noticeably, our breath becoming visible in the air. It wasn't natural, it was too sudden, too extreme. I saw Jacob shiver as he rubbed his arms, even though it was the middle of summer. The lights flickered in and out, and for a moment, I thought I saw something, someone move in the hallway ahead. But when I blinked, it was gone. Still, the feeling didn't leave me. It gnawed at the edges of my mind, subtle at first, like a forgotten dream. But the longer we stayed, the more oppressive it became. The walls seemed to close in, the corridors stretching and bending in impossible ways, leading us deeper into the belly of the beast. Did you hear that? Erin stopped dead in her tracks, her face pale under the flickering light. Hear what? Jacob said, but his voice was shaky. Whispers, she muttered, turning her head slowly to the side, as if trying to locate the source. I strained my ears, but all I could hear was the groaning of the old building, the creaks of settling beams. But then, there. A faint whisper, too low to make out the words, but unmistakably human. We stood in silence, straining to hear more, and suddenly the temperature dropped even lower, as if something cold had passed through us. There's no one here, Jacob said, though it sounded more like he was trying to convince himself. That's when we saw the shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light. It moved too deliberately, too fluidly. At first, it was just a shape at the end of the hallway, a blot of blackness darker than the shadows around it. Then it shifted, stepping forward just enough for the faint light to catch the outline of a face, long, hollow, and gaunt. Who's there? I called out, even though my instincts screamed at me to run. The shadow didn't answer. Instead, it seemed to drift closer, a slow, agonizing movement, like something out of a nightmare. My legs froze, refusing to obey the terror surging through my veins. Jacob stepped in front of me, his flashlight pointed directly at the figure. And then, it disappeared. Just vanished, like smoke. What the hell was that? Jacob whispered, his voice a harsh rasp. None of us could answer. But the whispers grew louder. The walls seemed to be whispering, their voice a chorus of faint, incomprehensible murmurs. Erin was shaking now, her breaths coming in shallow gasps. The hospital had felt wrong before, but now it felt alive, as if it had been waiting for us, drawing us in deeper, feeding on our fear. We stumbled forward, pushing deeper into the hospital, not because we wanted to, but because we had no choice. Every step back felt like stepping into something worse, something watching us from behind. The hospital was no longer just a building, it was a trap, a place that consumed the living. Jacob stopped suddenly. "Wait," he whispered, pointing at a door just ahead, hanging slightly ajar. There was something written on it, smeared in a faded red substance that sent a chill down my spine. "Room 233, Erin read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. "Isn't that the one they found her in?" Her. The nurse. The one who had died under those strange circumstances all those years ago. I felt my blood run cold. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the darkness was absolute. I should have turned around then, should have left. But something inside me compelled me forward, even as the whispers grew louder, and the temperature dropped to freezing. The last thing I remember before stepping into that room was the feeling of a cold hand brushing against mine, pulling me in. And then the door slammed shut behind us. Part 2, Whispers in the Dark. The door slamming shut behind us reverberated through the hallway, a deafening sound that felt final, like the hospital was sealing us inside. I lunged back toward it, my hands fumbling for the handle. It didn't budge. "Try harder," Erin hissed, her voice panicked. She grabbed Jacob's arm, her nails digging into his skin. "I am trying," I shouted, my voice cracking. Sweat dripped down my forehead despite the cold, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out, *now star. But it wasn't just the door. Something about the air had changed. It was thicker, almost suffocating. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint vibration, like a heartbeat. I could hear it, faint at first, then louder, the unmistakable sound of whispers, now echoing around us, a soft cacophony that made it impossible to think straight. "It's coming from the walls," Jacob muttered. His flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows that seemed to dance and twist in ways that defied logic. Each shadow felt like it had a life of its own, like it was watching us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "What's coming from the walls?" Erin asked, her voice trembling. Her eyes darted around, following every shadow. The whispers intensified, a low murmur that swirled around us like a fog. I pressed my hands against my ears, trying to block them out, but it didn't help. The whispers weren't just outside, they were inside my head now, crawling through my mind like maggots. In the chaos, a single word seemed to push through the noise, repeating over and over, "Stay." "Let's get out of here, Erin urged, tugging at Jacob's sleeve. Jacob nodded, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. The door refused to open, and the windows, covered in grime and who knew what else, were sealed tight. We were trapped. "Try the other door," I suggested, pointing to the far side of the room, where another door led deeper into the hospital. We had no other choice. Jacob led the way, his hands trembling as he grasped the handle. The door creaked open easily. Too easily. The hallway beyond was pitch black, save for the faintest outline of shapes, old gurneys, overturned hospital carts, and something that looked like a wheelchair lying on its side. The air was colder here, and it smelled like rot. "I don't want to go in there," Erin whispered, backing away. "We don't have a choice," Jacob said, though his voice wavered. He stepped forward, and we followed him reluctantly, our footsteps echoing loudly in the empty space. As soon as we entered the hallway, the door behind us slammed shut again. Erin gasped, spinning around. There was no handle on this side. "Oh God," she muttered, panic rising in her voice. "We're trapped." "Keep moving," Jacob ordered, his voice tense. He raised his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the floor. The corridor stretched on endlessly, the darkness at the far end almost swallowing the light. It felt like we were walking deeper into the heart of something malevolent, something that had been waiting for us. About halfway down the hall, we saw it. A shadow, just like the one from before, but this time, it wasn't just standing at the end of the hallway. It was moving, slowly, deliberately, coming toward us. "Run," I whispered, my throat dry. No one needed convincing. We bolted down the hall, our footsteps pounding against the old linoleum, the whispers following us like a swarm of insects. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, as though we were running in place, no matter how fast we moved. Behind us, the shadow figure picked up speed, its form growing taller, more distorted, with each step. It didn't move like a person. It glided, unnatural and fluid, its long limbs stretching in ways that defied explanation. I glanced back just once, and I saw its face, or what was left of it. Hollow eyes, a mouth twisted into an impossible grin, and skin that seemed to ripple as if it were barely clinging to the bones beneath. Jacob was ahead of us, already trying the door at the far end of the hallway. His hands shook so badly that he fumbled the handle several times before finally managing to twist it open. We poured through the doorway, slamming it shut behind us. We were in another room now, but this one was different. The walls were lined with shelves, all of them filled with dusty medical equipment. A surgery table stood in the middle, the leather strap still attached, though rotting. The smell in here was worse, like decay mixed with something foul, something that made my stomach turn. Aaron collapsed against the wall, breathing heavily. "What the hell is that thing?" "I don't know," Jacob replied, his voice shaky. "But it's not human." The whispers had quieted down, but they were still there, lingering just beneath the surface of the silence. I could feel them crawling under my skin, like 1,000 invisible fingers brushing against my nerves. Then we heard it, faint at first, then louder. A scraping sound. Like nails on glass. It was coming from the door. Slowly, I turned toward it, dread building in the pit of my stomach. The door we had just slammed shut was now trembling, as if something on the other side was testing its strength. The scraping sound intensified, turning into a sharp screech that made my teeth hurt. "Is it trying to get in?" Aaron asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jacob stepped toward the door, holding his flashlight tightly like it was a weapon. His hand hovered over the knob for a moment, then he pulled it back. "We need to barricade it," he said. "Now." We rushed to push the heavy shelves in front of the door, piling whatever we could find, old equipment, carts, anything to create a barrier between us and whatever was outside. But as we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. The whispers had changed, they weren't just in the walls anymore. They were in us. And then, as if in response to that realization, something moved in the corner of the room. It was barely noticeable at first, a shifting shadow, darker than the rest of the room. But as we all turned to face it, I felt my blood turn to ice. There was someone, something, sitting on the surgical table. It hadn't been there a moment ago, and yet, there it was. A figure, shrouded in darkness, its features obscured by the shadows, but the eyes, the eyes, gleamed with an unnatural light. It stared at us, unmoving. We froze. The whispers grew louder. And then, it smiled. Part 3, The Shifting Darkness. The smile on that thing's face, if you could even call it a face, was wrong. It stretched unnaturally, splitting the dark where its mouth should have been, too wide, too jagged. The eyes, those glowing orbs, pierced through the gloom, fixing on us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. None of us spoke. We couldn't. Fear had clamped down on our throats, stealing our voices. The only sounds in that room were the rapid thuds of our hearts and the faint, sickening scrape of whatever was behind the door still trying to claw its way in. Jacob finally broke the silence. "What is that?" I don't know," I stammered, taking a step back. My body felt frozen, like I was moving through molasses. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but my legs refused to obey. Erin, pale as a ghost, pressed herself against the far wall, shaking her head. "This isn't real. It can't be real." But it was as real as the cold sweat dripping down our faces. As real as the whispers that now swarmed in the air, louder and louder, filling every inch of the room with their eerie chant. Jacob raised his flashlight and pointed it at the figure on the table. The beam barely cut through the darkness, as if the shadows around it were absorbing the light. But for a brief moment, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The figure was wearing what looked like a nurse's uniform. Its fabric tattered and worn, clinging to a body that no longer seemed human. "Is that her?" Aaron whispered. "The nurse. The one who had died under mysterious circumstances. The one whose ghost had been seen wandering the hospital corridors. But this thing, whatever it was, wasn't just a ghost. It was something much worse." The figure moved. Slowly, it tilted its head, the motion jerky, as though it wasn't used to having a body. The smile never faltered, that grotesque, too wide grin still stretching across its face. Then, in a voice that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once, it spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried an unnatural weight that pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. It wasn't just a warning, it was a statement of fact. We shouldn't have come. And now, we were trapped. Jacob stumbled back, nearly dropping his flashlight. What do you want?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it slowly rose from the table, its limbs moving with a strange fluidity, like a puppet on strings. The whispers grew louder, their chant becoming a dizzying, disorienting hum that filled my head with static. I took another step back, my hands trembling. The door was blocked. There was nowhere to run. The thing moved closer, its eyes never leaving us. Its steps were slow, deliberate, like it was savoring the moment. And then, just as it reached the center of the room, it stopped. For a brief moment, everything went silent. The whispers, the creaking of the building, everything just stopped. Then, without warning, the lights in the room flickered violently. The shadows twisted and writhed, like they were alive, and the figure's grin widened, stretching so far it looked like its face would split in half. Suddenly, the door behind us rattled, the pounding on it growing more frantic. Whatever was outside was trying harder now, slamming into the door with increasing force. The shelves we had piled against it shook, the metal carts clattering as the entire barricade started to buckle. Aaron let out a scream, and Jacob spun around, frantically trying to push more equipment in front of the door. But it was no use. Something on the other side was determined to get in, and it wasn't going to stop until it did. "Help me!" Jacob shouted, his voice laced with panic. I rushed over to help, grabbing hold of a nearby hospital bed and shoving it against the door. But the second my hands touched the cold metal, I felt something crawl over my skin, something invisible, something wrong. My vision blurred for a moment, and in that brief flash, I saw something horrible, faces, twisted in agony, pressing against the other side of the door. They were pushing through the walls, their hands reaching for us, their mouths open in silent screams. I stumbled back, gasping, my chest tight with fear. It's not just one thing. There's more. So many more. Jacob looked at me, wide-eyed. "What are you talking about?" "There's more of them, Jacob. They're all around us." The door shuddered violently as another powerful blow hit it. Cracks were starting to form in the wood, splintering under the pressure. Aaron screamed again, but it wasn't because of the door. She was pointing at the figure in the center of the room, the one that had been standing still this whole time. Its grin had faded, replaced by a look of pure malice. And in one sudden, unnatural motion, it lunged at us. Everything happened in a blur. Jacob grabbed Aaron and pulled her back just as the figure's hand swiped at her, its long, bony fingers grazing her arm. A dark stain spread across her sleeve, like her skin was burning from the inside. Aaron cried out in pain, clutching her arm as she stumbled into Jacob's arms. It touched me," she whimpered, her voice breaking. "Keep away from it," Jacob shouted, pulling Aaron toward the far corner of the room. I followed, my heart pounding in my ears. But the figure didn't stop. It moved toward us, faster now, its eyes gleaming with a cold, unnatural light. The whispers had become deafening, drowning out everything else. I could feel them inside my head, digging into my thoughts, twisting them, making it impossible to think clearly. We backed into the corner, trapped. The door behind us was buckling under the pressure of whatever was outside, and the figure in front of us was closing in, its fingers stretching out toward us. This was it. There was no way out. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the room. The door to our left, one we hadn't noticed before, swung open violently, slamming into the wall. For a moment, I thought it was just another trick, another hallucination brought on by the whispers. But then I saw the light pouring through the doorway, bright, almost blinding. Without thinking, Jacob grabbed Aaron and bolted for the door. I followed close behind, my legs moving on autopilot. We burst through the open doorway, the light swallowing us whole as we stumbled into the next room. The door slammed shut behind us, cutting off the darkness, the whispers, and the figure that had been chasing us. For a moment, everything was silent. No whispers. No scraping. Just the sound of our ragged breaths and the pounding of our hearts. We had escaped. For now. But as I looked around the room we had entered, my stomach dropped. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. We were standing in what looked like an old operating theater. The floor was stained with dried blood, and rusted surgical tools lay scattered across metal trays. The walls were lined with faded photographs, doctors and patients, all smiling, their eyes glinting with a strange, unsettling light. And in the center of the room, strapped to the operating table, was a figure. A figure that looked exactly like me. Part 4, The Doppelganger. The figure on the operating table, it was me. Every detail was perfect, the shape of my face, the scar on my chin from when I'd fallen off my bike as a kid, even the worn blue hoodie I was wearing. But this version of me wasn't moving. It lay perfectly still, its arms and legs strapped down with thick, cracked leather restraints. My mind struggled to make sense of it. My pulse pounded in my ears, the blood roaring like a tidal wave. I felt like I was standing on the edge of some terrible truth, one that would shatter me completely if I dared to step any closer. "What the hell?" Jacob muttered, breaking the suffocating silence. His eyes were wide, flicking between me and the thing on the table. "What is that?" I don't know," I stammered, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. My feet refused to move, frozen to the spot as if the room itself was holding me in place. It's not me." But the words felt hollow, like I was trying to convince myself of something that wasn't true. Aaron whimpered, clutching her wounded arm. The burn from the figure's touch had spread, dark veins crawling up her skin. "I don't feel right," she whispered, her voice thin and fragile. "We need to get out of here." "We can't leave," Jacob said, his eyes still locked on the table. "Not until we know what's going on." "Know what?" Aaron snapped, her voice suddenly sharp with fear. "We're being hunted by things that aren't human. We need to go, Jacob. Now." But he wasn't listening. He was staring at the version of me on the table, like he was caught in a trance. His face had gone pale, his hand trembling as he reached toward the body. "It's so real," he muttered. "It's so, you." "Jacob, don't." I shouted, rushing forward to grab his arm, but I was too late. His fingers brushed against the copy's skin, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, in an instant, the copy's eyes snapped open. A collective gasp escaped our throats as the body, my body, turned its head to look directly at me. Its eyes were hollow, dark voids that swallowed the light. But there was something worse in them, something ancient and hungry. It smiled. Not the twisted grin of the shadow figure we'd seen earlier. No, this smile was different. It was knowing, familiar star. Like it had been waiting for this moment. "What are you?" I demanded, though my voice was barely above a whisper. The copy didn't answer. Instead, it began to move, slowly straining against the leather straps, the smile never leaving its face. The restraints groaned under the pressure as it pushed harder, inch by inch, like it was testing their strength. "Back away!" Erin screamed, stumbling backward, her hand gripping her arm where the burn had spread. But we were all rooted to the spot, watching in horrified fascination as the copy of me fought against its bonds. There was something mesmerizing about it, something that pulled at the edges of my mind, coaxing me to come closer, to reach out. Then the straps snapped. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, a sharp crack that echoed off the blood-stained walls. The copy sat up slowly, its movements unnatural, like a puppet being jerked on strings. It swung its legs over the edge of the operating table and stood up, towering over me. "Jacob," I muttered, my voice trembling. "Jacob, we need to go." He didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the copy, his expression blank, almost like he was in a daze. The whispers, which had faded into the background, were rising again, louder this time, more insistent. "Come closer." I took a step back, pulling at Jacob's arm, trying to break him out of whatever trance he had fallen into. But his feet were glued to the floor, his eyes wide with a strange kind of reverence, like he was looking at something sacred. The copy reached out, its hand extending toward Jacob's face. The skin on its hand was pale, sickly, and there was something wrong about the way its fingers bent, like they didn't have bones. As it reached for him, the whispers became a roar, filling the room with their horrible chant. "Take his place. Jacob, move." I shouted, yanking at his arm with all my strength. This time, he stumbled, breaking free from the trance just as the copy's fingers brushed against his cheek. The change was immediate. Jacob collapsed to the floor, gasping, his hands clawing at his face. His skin was pale, the veins under his skin darkening, spreading out in black tendrils just like Erin's arm. He let out a pained scream, curling into himself as the corruption raced through his body. I grabbed his shoulders, shaking him. "Jacob! Stay with me." But he was convulsing now, his body jerking violently as the infection spread. Erin dropped to her knees beside me, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her own injured arm. "We're all going to die here," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "No, we're not," I growled through gritted teeth. I refused to believe it. There had to be a way out, there had to be. The copy was watching us, its head tilted, eyes gleaming with amusement. It took a step forward, its body twitching unnaturally with every movement, like it was adjusting to its new freedom. I backed away, pulling Jacob with me, though I knew we couldn't outrun it. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, my voice raw with desperation. "What do you want?" The copy's smile widened. "You," it whispered, in a voice that was my voice. "I want you." My blood ran cold. The room spun around me, the whispers growing louder, merging with my own thoughts until I could barely hear myself think. The copy was closing in, its steps slow and deliberate. There was no way out. I could feel the walls closing in, the darkness swallowing the room. I glanced at the door behind me, the one that had burst open earlier. It was still there, still cracked open just enough for us to escape. But to get there, we had to get past the copy. Jacob groaned, his eyes fluttering as he tried to sit up, his body shaking with the effort. I could see the dark veins spreading across his skin, threatening to consume him entirely. "We have to move," I whispered, grabbing Erin's arm. "We can still make it." Erin nodded weakly, though she looked like she was barely holding it together. I hauled Jacob to his feet, slinging his arm over my shoulder as I dragged him toward the door. The copy didn't move to stop us. It just stood there, watching, its grin growing wider as we stumbled toward the exit. It's letting us go, I thought. But that didn't make me feel any better. It was too easy. We reached the door, and I threw it open, pushing Jacob and Aaron through before following after them. The moment we crossed the threshold, the whispers stopped. The temperature rose. The air felt lighter. We were back in the hallway. I didn't stop to catch my breath. We had to keep moving. We had to get as far away from that room as possible. But as we hurried down the corridor, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That we weren't alone. I glanced over my shoulder, and my heart nearly stopped. Walking just a few steps behind us was the copy of Jacob. Smiling that same terrible smile. Part 5, The Mirror's Edge. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before us, each step we took echoing louder than the last. It felt like we were moving in slow motion, dragging our bodies through thick, invisible sludge. The weight of everything that had just happened pressed down on us, suffocating. Jacob's arm was slung over my shoulder, his legs barely able to support him. The dark veins crawling up his skin were spreading fast, twisting like roots seeking to consume him whole. Erin limped beside me, her eyes wide with pain and fear, clutching her arm as if she could hold the corruption at bay. But it wasn't just Jacob we had to worry about. When I glanced back again, there it was, the copy of Jacob, pacing behind us with slow, deliberate steps. Its face was a near-perfect replica of his, except for the eyes, those hollow, soulless eyes that gleamed in the dim light. It was smiling, always smiling, as if it knew something we didn't. And it wasn't alone. Behind the copy of Jacob, the shadowy figure from before glided along the corridor, its body moving with that same unnatural, jerky fluidity. It stayed just far enough back to blend with the shadows, but I could feel its presence. And worse, I could hear the whispers again. Faint, but growing. They were crawling back into my head, filling the space with twisted, incomprehensible voices. "We need to move faster," I gasped, tightening my grip on Jacob. He was slipping in and out of consciousness, his eyes glazed, his breath ragged. Erin nodded weakly, but she was barely holding on herself. Her face was pale, and her movements sluggish, as if the infection in her arm was draining her strength by the second. I didn't know where we were going, only that we had to keep moving. The hospital was a maze of darkened hallways, each one identical to the last, the walls lined with peeling paint and rusted equipment. The further we went, the more everything started to look the same. It was like the hospital was shifting around us, leading us in circles. I took a sharp turn down another hallway, hoping, praying, that we would find an exit, but it only led to another dead end. A door, sealed shut with thick iron bars. I cursed under my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "They're getting closer," Erin whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't need to look back to know it was true. The air had grown colder again, and the soft sound of footsteps was echoing behind us, more than just one set now. I could feel their eyes on us, feel the weight of their presence pressing down on me. The hospital itself seemed to be breathing, each corridor pulsing with a life of its own. "Come on, Jacob, stay with me," I muttered, trying to shake him awake, but his head lolled to the side, his body limp in my arms. We can't keep running," Erin said, her voice cracking. It's pointless. We're not going to make it." "Yes, we are," I snapped, refusing to let her words sink in. "We just need to find a way out." But even as I said it, I knew she was right. There was no way out. The hospital wouldn't let us leave. We were trapped in its grasp, like flies caught in a web, waiting for the spider to make its move. I looked down at Jacob, whose skin was now turning an unnatural shade of gray. The veins were spreading faster, creeping up his neck, reaching toward his face. He was dying, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. That's when I saw the door. It was barely noticeable at first, hidden in the shadows of a side corridor. A small, unmarked door, different from the others. It wasn't rusted or barred, and there were no signs warning us away. It just stood there, almost inviting, as if it had been waiting for us to notice it. I didn't hesitate. I dragged Jacob toward it, Aaron stumbling behind. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling, and turned it. The door swung open with a soft creak, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "Come on," I urged, pulling Jacob through the doorway. Erin followed, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. As soon as we were through, I slammed the door shut behind us. The whispers faded instantly, the oppressive cold lifting. For the first time in what felt like hours, we were alone. We stood there for a moment, catching our breath, the silence heavy around us. Where does it lead?" Erin asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted. "But it's better than being out there." I looked down at Jacob, who was slumped against the wall, barely conscious. His breathing was shallow, and his skin was deathly pale. "We need to move," I said, my voice hoarse. "We can't stay here." Erin nodded, though she looked like she could barely stand. Together, we half-dragged, half-carried Jacob down the narrow staircase, each step echoing in the darkness. The air grew colder the further we went, the faint scent of decay lingering in the air. The staircase spiraled down for what felt like forever, the darkness growing thicker with each turn. But eventually, we reached the bottom, where another door waited. I hesitated for a moment, my hand resting on the handle. There was no going back now. Whatever was behind this door, it was our only option. With a deep breath, I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room beyond was massive, far larger than I'd expected. It was some kind of underground chamber, the walls lined with old medical equipment, surgical tables, trays of rusted tools, and machines that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. The ceiling was high, lost in shadow, and the air was thick with the stench of rot. But what caught my attention most was the figure standing in the center of the room. It was me. Another copy, no, this was the same copy. The one from the operating table. It stood there, perfectly still, its eyes locked on me, that same knowing smile on its face. "Welcome," it said in my voice, the sound sending chills down my spine. I stumbled back, my heart racing. What is this?" The copy tilted its head, the smile never fading. "This is where it ends." "What do you mean?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What do you want from us?" The copy didn't answer. Instead, it began to walk toward us, its movements slow and deliberate. I backed away, pulling Jacob and Erin with me, but there was nowhere to go. The walls pressed in, the darkness swallowing us whole. "You can't escape," the copy said, its voice low and soft, like a lullaby. "You were never meant to leave." I felt something brush against my leg, and when I looked down, I saw the shadowy figure from the hallway crawling toward us, its twisted limbs dragging it across the floor. More figures appeared in the corners of the room, slipping out from the shadows, copies of us, of Jacob, of Erin. All with those hollow eyes and that terrible, knowing smile. "We have to go," Erin whispered, her voice tight with terror. But there was nowhere to run. The room seemed to close in on us, the figures circling, drawing closer and closer. The air was thick with whispers, louder now, almost deafening, as if the hospital itself was speaking to us. And then, the copy of me stopped, standing just inches away. It reached out, its fingers brushing against my cheek. "Let go," it whispered. "It's over." I felt the cold spread through me, crawling under my skin, sinking into my bones. My vision blurred, the room spinning around me. The figures, the copies, they were closing in, their voices blending together in a chorus of whispers. I was falling, sinking into the darkness. There was no escape. No way out. But just before the shadows swallowed me whole, I saw it, myself star. Standing on the other side of the room, watching. It wasn't a copy. It was me, the real me. And in that moment, I understood. This hospital wasn't just haunted. It wasn't just a place of darkness and death. It was a mirror, reflecting us, twisting us, pulling us into its depths until we became part of it. And now, I was part of it too. The last thing I heard before the darkness claimed me was the sound of my own voice, whispering from somewhere far away. Welcome home.